I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. At RMIT, we would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which the university stands. We respectfully acknowledge elders past, present and future. Today we welcome Kieran Hagerty. He's from the Urban Cultures and Technologies group within Kerr. Kieran is a librarian and sociologist. He's currentently a PhD candidate working on an ARC linkage project representing multicultural Australia in national and state libraries, with Associate Professor Ian McShane and Dr. Jodie Boyd. Kieran's PhD research considers how the web has changed how national and state libraries build collections and how they are used. He's particularly interested in how automation and third-party applications used in collecting websites and social media are changing the nature of curation and heritage, and the questions that these changes raise about politics, ethics, and the future of Australia's cultural record. Please welcome Kieran.
Thanks so much, Nigel, and thanks for everyone for coming along this morning. It's wonderful to be here today to present some research I'm doing at the Centre about national and state libraries with Ian McShane and Jodie Boyd. I'd like to start today's talk by acknowledging the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people, on whose unceded land I'm presenting from today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Today I'll be presenting about techniques that libraries use to share collective knowledge. In doing so, it's important for me to note that the techniques I speak of reflect how a specific cultural memory is mobilised, and one bound up with the processes of colonisation. And I also want to respectfully acknowledge the complex knowledge systems and technologies that have enabled the many First Nations communities of this continent to live on and care for this land and each other over tens of thousands of years. So on the slide, you'll see 4 buildings that sit in the centre of capital cities around the country, and you'll probably recognise them as Australia's national and state libraries. Now, these institutions have many roles, but a key role they share is to collect, preserve and make available the written record at national and state levels. The National Library of Australia, for example, has the mandate to maintain and develop a comprehensive collection of library material relating to Australia and the Australian people. Similarly, one of the state libraries, the State Library of New South Wales, has the mission to collect and preserve materials and evidence relating to our place in the world and make these accessible to everyone in New South Wales and beyond. And the other state libraries share similar missions or legislative mandates. While for much of their history, the materials and evidence these libraries have collected have looked like this, over the past 3 decades, they increasingly look like this. Now, the books, journals and manuscripts collected throughout these libraries' histories are now considerably outnumbered by enormous collections of websites and social media posts gathered over the past 25 years. And as researchers, I think we have the analytic tools to interpret and critique print-based collections, but we're less well versed in unpicking the biases, omissions and logics of these born digital collections. And this is what my research explores, what I call the assembling of the contemporary cultural record. My aim today is to disassemble this process for you and explore how the web has changed how national and state libraries build collections and how they're used. So today I'll be talking about one aspect of digital library collections. That's the focus of my research, which is the large-scale automatic harvesting of online content, referred to as web archiving. I'm particularly interested in the new actors and materials that are brought into the orbit of the library through these processes, and what this means for a critical understanding of contemporary Australia. I'll be exploring the ethical implications of automatically collecting traces of people's online interactions and making these available on an ongoing basis. I'll first explore how the process reorients the role of library collections and draw on examples from Australia and around the world to illustrate the political potential of taking something with a very short temporal orientation, like a website or a social media post, and making it last indefinitely in an archive or a library collection. I'll then discuss how web archiving and the computational logics that now underpin collecting in this area changed the nature of curation. And I'll be drawing on my recent ethnographic fieldwork at the National Library of Australia to share with you how library workers navigate the political and ethical challenges that emerge through contemporary collecting processes. So hopefully I can convince you throughout this talk today that libraries are not only sources of material for research, but sites of potential for looking at broader questions about the politics of online environments, the role of automated decision making in society, and the future of the public record. In some ways, we can see the incorporation of websites and social media posts into the collections of national and state libraries as a continuation of their role to collect our written culture. Yet the scale and character of the web makes collecting in this space quite distinctive. Particularly important for today's talk is the temporal orientation of the web. And you've probably had an experience where you're navigating around a web page and you receive a message like this. And this kind of mundane routine experience underscores the fact that content on the web is ephemeral. Things on the web can appear and disappear unexpectedly. Content can be deleted, a website owner can fail to renew their domain, pages can change their location. Much more common is that content on a given URL will change, and there's good reason for this. When we go to a website, we generally want the most up-to-date information. The ephemeral nature of web content is of obvious concern to institutions with mandates to collect and preserve public information, as well as those concerned with reliable sources of evidence to hold people and institutions to account. The rapid pace of technological development and obsolescence has led some to speculate that we're in the midst of a so-called digital dark ages, and you may have heard this term. This was a narrative that was particularly prevalent in the 1990s, but still persists, particularly in popular discussion around digital preservation. This narrative reflects a fear that vital information is at risk and that the public record could be recklessly manipulated. Indeed, this has played out dramatically over the past 20 years, and I'll mention just a couple of high-profile cases. In 2013, the British Conservative Party removed a decade of speeches from their website, with skeptics suggesting the party was evading public scrutiny. Similarly, after the election of Donald Trump, the official White House website removed any mention of climate change, which led to fears that other vital government information and data sources would be erased to suit a particular political narrative. Or closer to home, we can think of the example of Energy Minister Angus Taylor, who leaked a forged document to the press while claiming it came from the City of Sydney website. These episodes highlight that there's obvious value in having an independent public institution capture, preserve and provide ongoing access to content that can change or disappear unexpectedly, not least to hold powerful people and institutions to account. Libraries and other institutions started to capture and store some of the content on the web from the mid-1990s, and these efforts slowly came to be understood as part of a global movement as web archiving. At first, the technology was makeshift and somewhat rudimentary, and existing copyright law meant that the library had to seek and obtain permission from each individual creator of a website in order to collect it and make it available. And these constraints meant that in the late 1990s, library staff would spend approximately 6 hours of staff time archiving just one website. But over the years, particularly from 2004-2005, technological developments and changes to copyright law have underpinned a move towards increased scale in capturing online content. In 2004, the first customized software specifically designed for automatically gathering websites was developed. And this software, which is called a crawler or a spider, automatically follows links, capturing and copying content as it goes. And it allows collecting to occur rapidly and at scale. Just to give you an idea of the pace and scale of collecting using this software, during my fieldwork at the National Library, we ran a bulk crawl of Australian government websites. And after 5 days, it reached around 300 million records, or 23 terabytes. So considerable scale and pace. More scale means less human oversight in the process, certainly compared to the laborious process of previous decades. And the mix of human and automated decision making changes how curation of contemporary collections occurs. And this is what science studies scholar Susan Lee Starr would call invisible work, in that the choices and processes that shape the collection are concealed from view. My PhD research seeks to uncover and highlight this invisible work and how library workers are navigating the complexities of collecting content on the web. Having explained some of the complexities of web archives, for the rest of the talk, I want to focus on the effects of this distributed and technology-saturated process on contemporary cultural collections. I want to suggest that moving content from one context to another is a political act. This doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it does mean it has effects in the world. And this is what I mean when I refer to the politics of preservation. The ability to automatically capture ephemeral content with little human oversight and make this content immediately available also has unintended consequences. With all this in mind, I want to explore a couple of cases from the past couple of years that amplify the politics of preservation and how a range of different actors collectively shape contemporary library collections. While these are international examples, the kinds of questions they raise present considerable challenge for all libraries who collect online traces. So the blog post on the left outlines how the world's largest web archive allows users to upload content or paste a link, and the archive will provide free storage and access. However, the article explains that Islamic State synthesizers are using the archive as a web delivery platform for extremist propaganda. And this allows propaganda to continue to spread when other publishing platforms are blocked through content moderation. Now, there might be good reasons for including this kind of content in collections. However, the example shows how dispersed collecting processes can have unexpected consequences. Similarly, the article on the right of the slide outlines the life of conspiratorial propaganda about COVID-19 that was shared on social media. After being debunked, the article was quickly flagged and algorithmically demoted by social media platforms, and it failed to be widely shared. However, its proxy in the web archive went viral, a trend that was repeated for other polemic content hosted in the archive. While these examples are bound up in much larger social and political problems, they reveal how emerging collecting processes, underpinned by algorithmic and distributed selection, reshape the role of collections in society. But disinformation and propaganda are not the only concerns. Web archiving also forces us to confront tricky ethical questions. Do people have a right to delete their digital traces? While we might want to save a politician's social media presence before it's scrubbed by the user or the platform, we might not always reach the same conclusion. And the distinctions between a public personality and a private individual are not always clear-cut. Also, do users expect that content on the web is ephemeral, that the conversations people have on platforms will go down the drain with the companies that hosted them? I'm sure I'm not the only former MySpace user who's glad that my 18-year-old self is not captured in the national collection. And the popularity of social media services such as Snapchat and Instagram stories are built around the very notion of ephemerality, confounding attempts at collection and preservation, except possibly by the social media companies themselves. And the effects of preservation are not inconsequential. We can think of those in Afghanistan who have worked in the public sector, served the occupation, or were involved with a foreign NGO, who are now rushing to delete traces of their digital lives for fear of retribution from the returning Taliban. Or in the US, where police are increasingly using social media as a surveillance tool to target protesters and disrupt demonstrations. Or the rising rates of technology-facilitated abuse and harassment. In this social and political context, how should libraries consider these communities and the vulnerabilities inherent to their activities they participate in as they build publicly available collections of web data? This is a critical question in dangerous times. So how do those doing the collecting navigate the complexities of collecting content on the web? In this final section, I'll be drawing on my recent experience at the National Library of Australia, where I spent 6 weeks in the web archiving section conducting ethnographic fieldwork. During my time at the library, I observed and participated in the everyday work that goes into producing and maintaining library collections. I'll briefly describe 3 moments during my time at the library where questions of politics and ethics came to the fore, and how my informants navigate the complexities of intervening in the politics of the web. So at the library, the web archiving staff had kindly given me some titles to work through, so I could navigate for myself some of the challenges of collecting web content. I'd check the quality of the captures and make a decision about whether it was complete enough to archive. One morning while I was processing titles, I noticed this website called Tay's Way Movement was scheduled for gathering. And I visited the live site and read from the homepage, which was clearly an anti-vaccination website. I read media reports that the creators' social media accounts had restrictions placed on them in March 2019. And I thought about how even if the website is updated or taken down, the content can continue to be made available through library collections. With all this on my mind, I brought up the site with one of my informants, Paul, to get his views. I asked his views on collecting this material and making it available. Paul said that when permission had to be sought to collect content, many sites like this would see its inclusion in the national collection as a form of endorsement, especially given the description of library collections as representing material of lasting cultural value. However, Paul said he refused to judge the validity of the content. He said that his role was to check the quality of the capture on a technical level. And he said to assume that we would collect every site we collect for facts or misinformation, that would be insane. You couldn't do it. And at 9 billion records and growing, it's hard to disagree with his assessment. But nonetheless, it raises ethical questions. How to reconcile competing visions of what the web is, could, and should be. How to balance the need to collect what's happening in society with the unknown consequences of extending its life. One way to navigate these kind of tensions and challenges is through negotiation with website creators themselves. So for most of the Australian Web Archive's history, from around 1996 to 2017, library workers would contact the creator of a website to seek permission to capture their site. Staff at the library I spoke to would complain how time-intensive this was. Nonetheless, it provided an opportunity for staff to interact with website creators. Staff could often find themselves giving advice on how the creator could make their site more amenable to web archiving. Or a creator would have questions about the process, or express pride in the fact that their website was included in the national collection. In 2017, the Federal Copyright Act was amended, which allowed the library to capture material without having to gain written permission. This removed the burden of contacting publishers individually and increased the efficiency of web archiving considerably. However, it's worth reflecting on what's missed when negotiation and interaction is removed from the process. During my fieldwork, I was processing titles at the library, and I saw one was a blog I was familiar with. And I noticed in the record that there were conditions attached to the publisher's granting of permission to capture it and make it available. And the correspondence read, and I'll read a section of it. I've decided to grant permission for the library to collect my website. However, I wish to be credited simply as my pseudonym and do not give permission for my full name to be used in the catalogue record. This negotiation allowed access to proceed while respecting the rights of the creator. Now these interactions between humans have been supplanted by machine-to-machine interaction. Behind every website there is a user who will have their own reasons for the creation of a website. Extending its life or including it in the national collection may converge or come into conflict with these aims, involving negotiation and compromise. Part of this negotiation is teaching users and creators about the role of the library. One afternoon, Russell, another one of my informants, was explaining to me some of the common misunderstandings relating to web archives. He explained that people often assume that when the library collects a site, they would remove the previous versions and only keep the most up-to-date capture. The fact that the past snapshots were also available had to be communicated to creators and users. This strikes home that the role of a library is not just to collect, but to educate, to inform, to learn and to advocate. And these are processes that cannot simply be automated. Once we focus our analysis on the process of collecting rather than just the product and reveal the invisible work that underpins its production, we can think about how this process can be made as participatory as possible. So what are the implications of collecting web content on how we understand the contemporary role of libraries, particularly national and state libraries? First, we need to see curation as a process that's distributed between people and machines. This distributed labour has implications on what is selected for collections and what isn't. Second, the boundaries of what constitutes content worthy of preservation are constantly shifting. Rather than focusing just on how libraries define their collecting role, we should focus on how it's actually produced in dialogue between creators, users, and library staff. Third, content producers are often not aware of the function of web archives, and they probably don't think of themselves as publishers. But when they are, they can be highly reflexive in how they interact with them. Fourth, a move to increased scale raises interesting questions about where humans should intervene in automated decision making. And this is a trend that is accelerating in the cultural sector and in wider society, but it's not without its issues. Lastly, and most importantly, treating collecting as purely a mechanical or technical process can overlook how it's a cultural practice that interacts with the politics and ethics of how knowledge is produced, disseminated and authorised in society. So contemporary library collections bring together, often in unexpected ways, a range of groups that may have divergent views on what the web is, could and should be. This returns me to my key point, that taking something that would otherwise disappear and making it endure has consequences in the world. This makes it a political and ethical act. It makes it neither wholly good nor wholly bad, but rather, I suggest, it makes it dangerous. And as Michel Foucault said, if everything is dangerous, then we always have something to do. With that, I'll wrap up. You can find out more about my research on my website, assemblingtheweb.com, and you can find me on Twitter @assemblingweb. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Kieran, for that fascinating talk. It was terrific and really thought-provoking. I'll open up to questions.